love reading romance, even with my mom. Historical, paranormal, a good rom-com. We both like a grump, an alpha and a beard. But reading with my mom, well, it gets kinda weird. I'm reading steamy scenes, getting bothered and hot. But if mom is asking, I read it for the plot. We look for swoony scenes, those moments that delight. Communication's good and the banter's so right. So if you'd like to read along and join the group, here's a little secret, I'll let you into the loop. It's just a little show that we like to dub Not Your Mom's Romance Book Club.
Welcome to the book club that sure is not your mom's romance book club, but it is my mom's. I'm Ellen, and joining me as always is my mom. Hi Mom, how's it going?
Hello Ellen, it's going so good.
Awesome. Today we are chatting about The Heart Principle by Helen Hoang. But first, Mom, what's the funniest place you've ever fallen asleep?
That's an interesting question, Ellen.
There's so many to choose from with you.
Well, probably, I don't know if we've shared this before, but I've broken 2 iPads.
Oh yeah, we have. I think we have. Yeah, this is the most my mom way that an iPad could ever be broken.
And how did those iPads break, Ellen?
Mom fell asleep on the toilet with an iPad and dropped it on the tile.
Okay.
And she broke not 1, but 2 iPads.
So it's not that I fall dead asleep. It's that I
doze
off and lose control of my hands for a moment.
Mom also oftentimes has led the singing at our church, and then she's sitting up on the stand, and then there will be in fact, one time one of our friends' husbands was speaking at church, and she took a picture of her husband speaking with Mom sleeping right behind him while they were up. I would fall
asleep on the stand, and then people would take pictures of me and text them to me. So I would get home from church, and I would have a bunch of pictures of me sleeping on the stand. Thanks, everybody.
I had to think harder about this question. I think, I don't know how funny this is, but when I was on my study abroad in Vienna, Austria, my friends and I went to a discotheque one night, and were there until the wee hours of the morning. And I lived in a house that was kind of on the outskirts of town, and so we had to take the longer train that was kind of outside of the network, and it didn't run. So we had to sleep in the foyer of my other friend who lived in central to the city. We had to sleep in the under the mailboxes at her apartment until this train started at 5. And so we were sleeping there for 2 hours, just reeking. Oh my gosh. My hair, I could not get the stink out of my hair from that place. No joke, I washed it many, many times, and I could smell it on me for a week and a half. Because it was spilled alcohol, spilled beer, and pot smoke, and bong water. I mean, I had all sorts of crap that was on me, and just it smelled so bad.
I have very coarse hair, and so my hair really retains scents.
Yeah, well, apparently mine does too, because I just had that. It was so disgusting.
Well, and we've both slept outside of the San Diego Convention Center.
I've done that many, many times. So that's my funniest. Both of us you haven't read anything else this week,
I
have
haven't
you?
read anything else this week. We haven't watched much.
We did see Eternals.
We did see Eternals.
When I didn't have to work on Thursday for Veterans Day. And we also watched Red Notice on Netflix this week, and that we liked Eternals more than it seems some people have.
Well, it's different than other Marvel movies, so if you go to it thinking it's going to be it
honestly kind
Avengers
of has more
movie.
of a DC vibe to it. And we thought Red Notice was fun.
Red Notice fun. It's just always fun watching Ryan Reynolds be Ryan Reynolds.
Yeah. And then I watched the entirety of a K-drama called Mad for Each Other. And it was very romantic-y. And it was very cute. So I liked that one. And that one is also on Netflix. And I wanted to tell my Veterans Day story because it's cute.
It is cute.
So you guys know, I've mentioned on here that I'm teaching kindergarten. And so the day before Veterans Day, I was teaching a lesson about Veterans Day and what it is and, tell it. And so what I did is I brought in a picture of me and my dad who served in the Air Force. When I was I was like 1 or 2, I think, in this picture. And, the kids were all very fixated on why I have blonde hair, but, and I was talking to them about veterans and, how we can celebrate Veterans Day by thanking a veteran. So I was saying, like, so go home and ask your, mom and dad if you know any veterans and, you can thank them. And they all just wanted to thank my dad. So I made a video of them saying, thanks, Miss Lloyd's dad. It's really cute. But then later that day, I was walking one of my kids out to his car for pickup. And he's this very kind of introspective, gregarious kid. And, I was talking to him and I'm like, so are you going to do anything fun with your day off? He's like, no, I think I'm just going to stay home and celebrate your dad. He seems like a cool guy. And I was like, oh,
out of the mouth to
I
babes.
just like, stay home and celebrate your dad.
We wouldn't even do that.
No, yeah. Anyway, so that's my kindergarten story of the week. Okay, so today we are chatting about The Heart Principle by Helen Huang. It is the third and I think final book in her Kiss Quotient series. We've previously discussed the first 2 books in the series, which are The Kiss Quotient and The Bride Test.
Did we do podcasts on all of them?
Yeah, we have done a podcast on each of these books.
There you go, Helen.
Yeah, and we have, no spoilers on this one, but we really loved Kiss Quotient and Bride Test. So here's the back cover description for The Heart Principle. When violinist Anna Sun accidentally achieves her career success with a viral YouTube video, she finds herself incapacitated and burned out from her attempts to replicate that moment. And when her longtime boyfriend announces he wants an open relationship before making a final commitment because he's a dick, that's my addition, hurt and angry Anna decides that if he wants an open relationship, then she does too. Translation, she's going to embark on a string of one-night stands. The more unacceptable the men, the better. That's where tattooed motorcycle riding Quan Diep comes in. Their first attempt at a one-night stand fails, as does their second and their third, because being with Quan is more than sex. He accepts Anna on an unconditional level that she herself has just started to understand. However, when tragedy strikes Anna's family, she takes on a role that she is ill-suited for, until the burden of expectations threatens to destroy her. Anna and Quan have to fight for their chance at love, but to do that, they also have to fight for themselves. So, Mom, what did you think of The Heart Principle?
This one was a hard one to categorize. So here's what I'm going to say. As a book that I read, I loved it. And as a romance, I really liked it. It's not a complete romance, only a romance novel. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, no. I think I'm going to give it a love. Here's the thing. So I didn't have to work on Thursday. So on Wednesday night, I was like, oh, maybe I'll start the book. Get a jump start on the book. I had some period pains and stuff going on. So I ended up staying up.
TMI, but okay.
Well, listen.
You girls feel me.
I have no qualms about talking about my period. So I stayed up much later, and then I ended up finishing the entire book that night. So I read this all in one sitting. And we need to remember, when I talk about this book, I was finishing it at 3:30 in the morning. So when I say that I cried for the entire last third of the book, this is not an uncommon occurrence for me, because if I stay up past 2:00, it's inevitable that I'm probably going to cry if there's even the slightest sort of tear-inducing thing. And this is just kind of a tangential, but the next day, you know how like when you've been up crying for whatever reason, not that this happens to me a lot, I just need people to understand that, but like if you've been crying a lot like the night before and then the next day you're just very emotionally vulnerable. So the next day we went and saw Eternals. And
Did you cry in Eternals?
I did not. Well, it's worse. I didn't cry in Eternals, but I cried in 3 of the previews.
Yeah, I think I might have cried in some of the previews too.
I cried in the Belfast preview. I cried in the Sing 2 preview.
Wow.
But I was just getting like, oh, I'm very moved right now. And
I think it might have been a period-induced thing.
I think there was a lot of that. I mean, it was, yeah. So I was at the like height of being, you know, able to cry. But I was really in this book, and I, like I said, cried a lot. And I completely, because I've read some of the listener comments, I completely understand that this is not going to be everybody's cup of tea. And I was thinking, if this book had come out last year, like, people would have had a really hard time with this one. But it's like Mom said, like, I don't know how much of a romance it is, and I don't even love it necessarily for the romance. I mean, I like anything with a side of romance, but I really loved the book, and just her writing is just so good, and she just like evokes such like well,
and she does such a
heart-wrench.
good job, because I was thinking about it. It would have been so easy to overdo parts of this book and make it so it was dragging, because it never really dragged, but it could have easily dragged. And not everybody might agree with me, but I thought it moved along well.
I mean, I read the whole thing in one sitting, or I should say one laying, because I was in bed the whole time.
And I don't know what your questions are, so I don't know how much you want me to talk about stuff about the book right now.
Let's just wait.
Okay.
What did you think of Anna as our heroine?
I really liked Anna a lot. I got extremely frustrated being in her head. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I think it's what the author was trying to put across. But I know
that I got frustrated, but it was just so like...
Well, not frustrated as in like the reading was frustrating, but, you know, channeling her it was, you know, it would make me anxious, and, you know, I would start feeling some of these things. And I think that's exactly what Helen Hoang was trying to do. And so, you know, kudos to her, because I did it, or maybe it's just me. But I really liked Anna a lot. She was very sweet and trying so hard. And, but just couldn't, you know, just this whole thing of her trying to please everybody. I guess it's fair to say she finds out that she's on the autism spectrum, and she is, you know, does a lot of research, and she says, yeah, I see myself in this, and almost finds it empowering that she's got this. And then her sister, especially, because her sister's the only one she tells, just kind of puts her down for it. It's like, oh, you know, that's just an excuse for you to be lazy, and yada, 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 and was terrible about it. Yeah. But, so trying to be in poor Anna's head, with her trying to please everybody, and not wanting anyone to be disappointed in her.
Especially at a certain part of the book where she's just so, like, beaten down by life in
everything
general.
That's going on with her dad and everything. Her dad gets sick and has a stroke, and they end up taking care of him, and it just about does her in.
Yeah, literally. Yeah, I also really liked her, and like you said, it was sometimes hard to be in her head, but I mean, and you know, this is not the first time that Helen Hoang has had a character. You know, we had Stella in the first book that was also on the autism spectrum, and a different kind, though. She definitely functioned differently than Anna did, which was interesting. And
Kai and
then Kai, who's got Asperger's in the second book. And so, but I just, first of all, I mean, and we talked about this recently with another book, and I'm not going to remember which one it is, but I don't know, just getting to kind of understand somebody else's journey, and like Mom was saying, just kind of getting to understand how a brain that, you know, is functioning with autism works and what it's like,
or at least this aspect of it. I'm sure that there's different.
Yeah, we're gonna talk some more about that too, but
it really made me. I wish I had. Honestly, I wish I had read this book while I was still teaching, because I think I would have treated a lot of some of my kids quite differently. It was very eye-opening for me to read this and be inside her head with the pattern. I had a kid who used to, when he would get in trouble, he'd sit back and he'd bang his head against the file cabinet, which sounds terrible. He didn't do it hard. It was just, and it would usually be during the testing or something, which made it even more frustrating because all the kids are trying to test and he's back there pounding. But I'm sure he was on the autism spectrum, and I'm sure that it was, I think that all the testing kind of triggered stuff in him, and this is his way of dealing with it. And I wouldn't get mad at him, but I really needed to send him out of the room, and I didn't always get a lot of support in that. But, because to have him doing that, so I really wanted to just send him to another room to do his test or whatever. And I didn't always get a lot of administrative support in that.
To be able to do modifications and stuff. I have a little girl in my class who she's on the spectrum, and yeah, it's interesting to spend some time kind of, with obviously a different, and I don't understand everything that's going on in this little girl's head, but I could see especially a lot of the masking stuff. This little girl, she gets really fixated on like a kid in the class, and then she's always trying to kind of be like that kid, and then she gets like a new kid every week. It's kind of interesting. She goes through like peaks and valleys with different kids, but yeah, so it's just, I agree, it's interesting to, especially as someone who works with these kids who kind of have some of the same stuff going on.
But it made me wish I had read something like this while I was still teaching and still dealing with kids who were struggling with these kinds of things.
For sure. Okay, what did you think of Quan as our hero? So we've known Quan.
We've known Quan. And I've loved Quan since the first book. I mean, he's delightful. Yeah. He's just warm and friendly, with his kind of exterior, a different kind of exterior, but he's kind of a teddy bear inside. Yeah.
I know that there's some people who, like, there's a lot of people that we've been looking forward to Quan's book, since The Kiss Quotient. I know I have. And so I know there's some readers who feel like a little short-sighted or a little cheated. Short-changed is, I guess, what the more appropriate term. Because this book definitely is Anna's book.
Yeah, it's definitely about Anna.
But if you think about it, like, I think that, I think the Bride Test was much more, I think her name was Esme's book, than it was Kai's book. But this one is definitely Anna's book. It's much more concerned with what's going on with Anna. I think, but, Quan gets his story about his cancer, and we're going to talk about some of that in a little bit. But I just really liked Quan as being a presence there, because she needed somebody who was understanding and was there with her. And so I really liked him for that in as our romance hero.
The thing I missed in this book that we got in Bride Test and Kiss Quotient is the interaction with his family.
Yeah.
And we didn't have any of that in this book. I mean, we saw some of Michael, but
Yeah, we never even saw Kai, right?
Yeah, he talks about Kai, especially when she gets diagnosed, and he talks about Kai, but we never see Kai. We never see
his mom, who like was a big part in Kai's book.
Yeah, and their restaurant, and so we didn't really get to interact with their family at all, which I kind of missed because I like their big, crazy, Vietnamese family.
Yeah, but all that being said, I love Quan. He is such a sweetheart, especially in kind of dealing with all the stuff that gets dealt to him and her in this book. And so
he's just so patient and kind. And that was another thing that I kind of felt like, oh, I wish we had more. I wish we had more buildup of their relationship before her dad got sick. Mm-hmm. I wished, and because a lot of the time I was thinking, why is he sticking through all that? I don't know. I wish they'd built up their relationship a little bit more before her dad got sick.
I mean, from his perspective, it's kind of almost like a love at first sight kind of thing. Yeah, because he falls quickly.
And then falls in love quickly.
Yeah, without wanting to say it to her. Yeah. So, first important question. Is this a romance? It's certainly not a rom-com.
No.
Which is, again, we've talked about this before, but what the cover.
Yeah.
And I think we've had this conversation with a Helen Huang book before. I just think that and I don't know what kind of covers her book should have, but I don't know that it's like the poppy illustrated cover.
Yeah.
I don't know, but
it has romance in it, but
it's not chiefly concerned with romance.
And I didn't walk away with the romance. I walked away with I'm really glad I read that book. I think it has some life-changing effects on me in regards to what it's the subject matter, but not the romance.
Yeah.
Is that fair to say?
And even, I mean, we're not there yet, but in thinking about my swoony moments, it's like it was hard to come up with one because...
Well, I even said to you, I said, it's hard to come up with swoony moments because we don't spend a lot of time with Anna and Quan. I mean... Yeah.
And a lot of their... Because this book takes place over a long period of time. And a lot of, like, what ends up being the bulk of their relationship is kind of told to us and not shown. So that makes it hard to, like, pick a swoony moment. For sure.
Because a lot of it is done with them just texting while she's staying at her parents' house, and so it's kind of told.
And then there's a big in the after section. If you've read it, you know what I'm talking about. But there's a lot of like, it was. I mean, there was a long time that passed in that section.
Yeah. Where
she's just kind of grieving and getting over
like months and months.
Yeah. So I think, I don't know that it's a straight, I think it's more women's fiction, for lack of a better word. But it definitely has romance in it. But like
I don't know that romance is the focus of it, though.
No, its chief concern is not romance.
Yeah.
It's a nice addition to everything else that's going on. But, okay. So we've kind of talked about this, but what did you think of the representation of autism? And I really wanted to talk about this idea, this thing of masking in the book as well. Because I think the masking not only is a thing that she does, but I think it's a kind of theme of the book. Because, I don't know, just her having to like figure out that that's what she's doing, and then it plays a big part in her journey because she has to figure out who she is and figure out how to express who she is to the people that are closest to her.
Right. And that's because she's and these were my thoughts while I was reading about the masking situation, because I never even heard that term. And, I thought it was really interesting to read about that and that way of coping with things.
Yeah, and especially interesting when she was talking about how more women go undiagnosed with autism because women are much better at this idea of masking, which makes total sense.
And when I read that, I thought, well, this is something I think that women kind of do.
Yeah.
More so than men.
In general, without autism.
In general, without autism.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think that we tend to want to please people. I think that, and I think maybe we're moving away from it, but I think it used to be worse in I think in history, it's been worse, where women have tried very hard to please everybody. What do you want from me? I'll be that.
But we generally, as a gender, certainly still do it far more than men. I don't even know if men are capable.
I don't think they know what it means. I don't even think they would understand what concept.
Which is interesting because, I mean, it's got it. I don't know if it's societal but I think it also has to be like some sort of biological brain chemistry thing in women that makes us more, I think this is a common thing, but we're just more emotionally aware than men are, right? And I think that is a brain chemistry thing, and so that just kind of makes us more aware of like, okay, this is the vibe, and this is what I need to like work with, and so I found all of that like super interesting in this book, and how she does that, and how that is kind of a diagnosis of her autism, is that she uses this as a way to kind of appear more quote unquote normal. And
to appear happy and fitting in, when in reality that is not what she felt inside at all.
Yeah. And so just this journey for her of not masking who she is and not masking this diagnosis, and not masking how she's feeling, and
the thing with Quan was that he was just going to be a one night stand. So from the get go, she's like, I'm not going to try to be anything for him. I'm just going to have sex with him and then move on. And so he gets to see all of her broken parts, like right off the bat. Yeah. And that's when she says, he's seen me at my worst and he still loves me. And, so that was the thing where, like, her other boyfriend that she'd had at the beginning of the book,
Julian,
she had never shown him
both. And we're going to talk about the sexy times, but maybe we can also sort of talk about it now. This is an example of sexy times being super pertinent to the plot.
Right.
Because this manifests in how she is in the bedroom a lot.
Which, would never have even, And are we going to talk about the author's note at the end of
Yes, we are.
Okay. So it would have never even occurred to me that could even be a thing that, she would have to deal with.
Yeah.
Especially with her, the patterns and that kind of stuff. And then her being so embarrassed about it.
Yeah.
It all kind of made it.
Yeah.
One of those frustrating things to read.
Yeah.
Not frustrating to read about, but frustrating you want it to be okay.
Yeah. Like, you just want her to be happy. It's
yeah.
just like, but yeah, so, I mean, like I said, this is not the first time we've had representation of autism in a Helen Huang book, but because like we said, it's a very different facet of it than what was explored with Stella in the Kiss Quotient. So I really liked that. I really liked learning about masking and just kind of, like we said, getting to think about how that kind of applies to our gender as a whole.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I think it's like super relevant, especially for women readers, because I think to a certain extent we can definitely all relate to kind of putting on a facade depending on the situations we're in and things like that.
Well, and I think a lot of it too is people expect that from us. I mean, you're a woman, so you're expected to be, happy to, feed a million people, or happy to, you know, whatever the situation, but because you're a woman, you're expected to be happy doing these things.
Yeah.
And
well, and it's also interesting when we get into the section of the book where she's expected to be this caregiver who is fine being a caregiver and able to do that. And it's kind of interesting some of the cultural expectations that are there with that as well. And
well, she talks about, because she's a woman who's not the oldest, so she kind of gets treated to the grunt work.
Yeah.
Essentially.
Yeah. And yeah, so I just found all of that super interesting, and a really interesting kind of general theme to you know, and what her journey ends up being. Okay, so let's talk about Anna and her family, and kind of Julian as well, with I guess we're going to talk about like overall caregiving and what that ends up doing to her, but I guess, okay, my first thing I want to say is if I were to have a quibble, because her family ends up being such a like big part of the story, and maybe this is just realistic to her experience, but I kind of wanted there to be an introduction to her family, because we kind of just get thrown into her family.
Yeah.
Like Anna doesn't even really talk about her family, even in like narration POV at all, until her, like, I mean, her parents are barely mentioned until her dad gets sick. And in a way, maybe that is, you know, she wasn't thinking about them. She wasn't going to see them.
Right.
It wasn't a thing. And then all of a sudden this happens and she gets thrown back into it. So maybe that's intentional, but for me, to a certain degree, when we start spending time with her family, I was kind of like, this sounds terrible, but I don't really care about these people because I haven't had any like context,
any interaction with them yet. So
does that make sense?
Yeah.
And like I said, I don't know if that's intentional or not, but that's just what I felt. But I found her masking to be particularly interesting with her family, because it's when Quan kind of first sees her with her family, he's like, why is she acting like this? She's acting super different. And so it was interesting to think about how she masked even more with the people that she's closest to.
And it was interesting how exhausted she got from doing that.
Yeah.
And then, so on top of that, she's trying to take care of her dad. She's trying to keep up this facade of who she is so that her family thinks she's this normal, happy person. And I use the term normal, not in a derogatory way, but, you know, so, and it would just literally exhaust her. I mean, she just could hardly function because of how draining it was.
Yeah. And, you know, the caregiving aspect is very draining on her, and I think that's why, is because she's not only performing this caregiving, which in and of itself is exhausting, but also having to keep up this facade that, you know, she has to do around her family, especially her sister, I think. And
she also realized, and I don't know if anybody else realized and just ignored it, but that her dad did not want to stay alive. He did not want to live like that. And, you know, so, and her sister kind of turns that on her, because she tries to mention it to her sister, and then her sister, you just want him to be dead.
So that you can be over.
Yeah, and she's like, that's not what I want. You know, and she doesn't ever really speak up for herself, which is another frustration. But I get that it goes along with the masking. But whenever they accuse her of anything, I just wanted her to say, tell them they're wrong. That's not they're putting words in your mouth, and but I think that's part of her.
But, and this is I think this is kind of one of the parts that made me cry the most, was I was really glad that, because, you know, her sister, I mean, like, we're left at the end of the book without any real resolution to her and her sister's relationship. I mean, they're still like on the outs with each other when the book ends. But I was really glad that she was able to kind of reconcile with her mom, and her mom was able to say, yeah, you have autism. And she's like, you knew? And she's like, yeah, I've kind of always suspected.
Well,
and the sister,
she didn't really know until Faith, was that the cousin's name?
Yeah,
because Faith is the one that mentions it to her.
Yeah, that's right.
But then she looks into it and can see that, just way she behaved as a child. And
well, and that was the other thing too, which I should have talked about when we were talking about autism. But I really liked the whole, when her therapist first says, like, I want you to look into this and I want you to tell me if this kind of rings true to you. And just the whole part where, she's very upset, and Kwan, comes and comforts her, and he says, well, what do you think? And she said, yeah, and there's a line in there that I'm going to butcher, but kind of like, it's kind of sad that I need a diagnosis to be like compassionate to myself. And, and so I think that's the difference between the mom and the sister, is that the mom takes the time to look into it and say, oh yeah, this does kind of ring true for her. And I'm able to think back on her as a child and recognize that, like, yeah, this does sound like my daughter.
Right.
Whereas I think with her sister never takes that time to look into it and understand what it actually is. I think she just hears the word autism and is like, oh, she's not autistic. She's not like every portrayal of autism in the movies, or, whatever. Because I think
like Rain Man or...
Yeah, people have a very kind of... If you don't understand it, people have a very kind of
it's called spectrum for a reason, and we all have a very, tiny visual of what it is from movies and TV shows and whatever.
So I really liked that. And I was really glad that they were kind of able to find some piece together in both the death of, spoiler alert, the death of the father and the husband, and in her diagnosis, and kind of find a new way to be close to each other. And the other thing, I don't know why this stuff made me cry so much, but the stuff with Uncle Tony,
that was so hard.
With him, like with his little small envelopes of money. Oh my gosh, I'm going to start crying now. But that just really got to me. And then to find out, because I didn't even think about it, but when her mom at the end was like, yeah, you're like Uncle Tony.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, he has autism too. Just like, and so yeah, that stuff really, really got me for some reason. Like, I really cried at that stuff. Okay, and then this is another big part for Anna, which we've touched on, but I wanted to talk about the caregiving in this book and kind of the strain that this takes on her. And I found it, because, I mean, we know, I'm thinking of a family that we know their dad was in a motorcycle accident, and then he was basically in a vegetative state for the rest of his life, before he passed away. And I know that when he did ultimately pass away, people were trying to give condolences to his kids and stuff, and we were talking to one of his kids, and they were like, yeah, I mourned him a long time ago.
Yeah.
So
the loss of him.
Yeah. And so just reading about that was really hard.
Well, and everybody kind of handles it different. I know when my mom was sick, and she wasn't really sick for a long, it was only a couple months that she was struggling with her cancer and
chemo
and going through chemo and struggling with all of that. And I would go to work all day, and then I would try to drop by and see her afterwards, but I couldn't make it every single day because, I'm raising 3 children and a husband who's gone a lot and working full time. And I remember my dad just blowing up at me at one point and just saying, you don't come see her. And just really, and as I look back on that, maybe I was having a hard time seeing her as deteriorating as she was. And I think my dad was feeling frustration. I mean, he was kind of taking it out on me, but I don't think it was necessarily
directed
at me. I think he just was frustrated with the situation, and you know, and I didn't yell back at him or anything. It wasn't a fight. I just kind of internalized it for a while. But looking back, I can see where he was struggling and I was struggling.
Well, he was dealing with it like 24/7.
Yeah. And like I said, I would try to go over as much as I could, but there was just a lot of life going on, and you know, and it was really hard to see her that way.
Well, she got really bad really quickly.
Yeah.
And it was hard to watch.
It was very hard to watch. I mean, she literally aged 10 years in the matter of a few weeks, and it was very hard to see. And so, I mean, I tried to do what I could, but I looking back, I probably could have done more.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the whole aspect of caregiving it's hard. It's hard, especially if it's a family member like that, because it's not only it's a lot of work to take care of them, but it's also the emotional struggle that's involved with it as well.
Yeah, because I think you, in a way, when it's something like that, especially like to the magnitude that she was dealing with her dad, it's like we were saying with that family, I think you start the grieving process.
Right.
So you're dealing with the grieving process on top of this, like, physically draining, you know, and mentally and emotionally and all of that. It's just...
Well, and I know they bring it up in the book, but really, seriously, someone needed to sit this family down and say, hire people to help you with this.
Especially, like, you have the money. And that's where I think, you know, because they're a Chinese family, and, you know, that's a culture that really...
cares for their elderly.
Emphasis on caring for the elderly and your family, and that's so important. And that's not the only culture that's like that. I think most cultures are like that to a certain extent, but strong emphasis on that. And I think especially for women, as is always the case, to be the caregiver. And so,
but I think in this case, hire someone to just do the drudge work. And then be there with him. Like, Tony would come and just sit by him and read, not to him, but just read beside him. But he was just there as a presence.
Yeah.
And you know, Priscilla would get all, because Priscilla was Priscilla, you know, she would, but Anna got it. Anna got, you know, it's all he could do right now. So that's what he's doing. He's doing the best that he can. Yeah. And everybody, you know, was doing the best that they could. And so you don't, you know, put people down for that.
Other people's abilities in that, and their capacity, I think, in that. And it's like we were saying earlier with her, she's not only dealing with all that, but also, you know,
dealing with the masking and all this other stuff that
especially with her sister, who, like, it seemed like she did it for more than anybody else.
Well, and as you get to know Priscilla, you know why she's masking for her, because
she's very high expectations.
Very high expectations, and not, you know, like we said, when she said she'd been diagnosed with autism, she's like, oh, that's just a way for you to be lazy, and that's just silly, and so
So now I want to talk about Kwan's journey with cancer, and now how, because spoiler alert, he is shy one testicle.
Yes.
And is not able to have children.
Right.
That are his own. And so it also really kind of affects his perception of his masculinity and things like that. So what did you think about that?
Well, it makes him feel like less of a man in some ways. And, but also I think he was self-conscious about that he looked different. And like she said, I mean, I don't think I would notice. But she says it doesn't look that much different, just a little lopsided. And
when she says something about, they're already weird enough looking as it is. Like, well, I don't really care.
Well, and I loved when he showed her his scar, and so she like kissed his scar because she was so glad that he was able to have had that surgery so that he could be there with her now.
Yeah.
So it was really kind of sweet. And anyway, that would be something hard
But
to
I
deal
do
with.
think I think that's a really real thing that a guy would feel
Oh, absolutely.
about, because, they care about those things a lot.
They do. They're very important to them.
They're very important. And so, like I said, it's definitely Anna's book, but I liked that we still got a little bit of a journey with him as well.
Well, and his little run to the Grand Canyon and that whole thing, that was all very, he just felt like he was failing everyone. He was just failing left and right. This is
failing as a man, failing as...
He'd broken up with Anna. His business, he thought he was going to lose his business. Just everything. And he just felt like he was falling apart.
Yeah. So, yeah, I just really I loved him.
I did too.
And those moments were, and I think especially because he spent most of his life kind of being the tough older brother to his brother who got bullied a lot and stuff like that, and
he was kind of, before all this, he was kind of tough and cocky and
well, and I think he's used to being the man, because he didn't grow up with his dad, correct me if I'm wrong, but so I think he's used to being the man of the family, and so I think that this kind of sting to his masculine pride really kind of doesn't number on him. And
I think also, he literally runs a company that designs clothes for children, and I think he works with kids, and I think that was really hard on him to not be able to have kids.
Okay. What I want to talk about the conflict now, which I'm thinking of. So at one point they have a birthday party for Anna's dad, and Quan is not invited, and her ex-boyfriend, who we haven't even talked about this aspect, but wanted an open relationship.
Seems
he's a dick.
Seems like we've read a lot of books lately where there's a dickish boyfriend at the beginning who breaks up, or in this case wants an open relationship, literally so he could go screw half of San Francisco, and maybe Sacramento too. Who knows?
It's close by. It's within driving distance.
And then he wants to come back and marry her, and it's just like, I would be like, dude, get your probably diseased junk out of here.
Yeah. And so he basically springs a marriage proposal on her and doesn't even really ask her, just announces that they're engaged,
that they're getting married
in front, and she doesn't know, but Quan is there at the party because he wanted to come see her, which broke my heart. But and so that's when he kind of gets very upset and runs away. But again, this is dealing with that theme of masking. At this point in the story, she's just so, like we were saying, emotionally, mentally, physically exhausted.
She's kind of just a shell of a person at this point.
Yeah.
And she's just kind of going through motions, trying to keep everybody, status
happy.
quo.
And so, she's just used to kind of giving in to what people want and expect of her. And so she kind of just, in a way, just kind of goes along with this marriage proposal. And in her head, she's thinking, okay, I'm putting on a facade. I'm masking right now for this party of people, but I'm going to tell him, no way, Jose. Once this spiel is done.
But she didn't want to make a big scene in front of everybody.
Which, in a way, even as somebody who's, I guess I know we were talking about how women mask in general, but I got that to a certain degree, it's super hard scene to read, and the aftermath too, because she's like, he just doesn't get it. I have to do this. I have to please people. I have to go along with it, and I think he does get it, and I think he understands where she's coming from, but it's still just super hard because, like we were saying, he's got this blow to his, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that he's feeling like
That
less of a
hit
man.
him all at one time.
Yeah. And so that scene was really hard.
It was very hard to read.
Yeah. Okay. Now, what did you think about the book after reading the author's note?
Okay, so I told you even when I was in the middle of reading the book that it would make me anxious to be inside her head when she was explaining all this. And I would feel that way throughout the book when she was explaining the masking and dealing with her family and all of it. So you said you cried during the end of the book. I cried reading I'm going to cry again. Reading the author's note where Helen Huang talks about how this is her story and this is what
her memoir.
Dang it. This is what she struggles with all the time.
Yeah.
And I just thought, wow, I struggled reading a book about it.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine living with that all the time. And I know that she's probably got medication and things now that are helping her, but
you know, she's living a happy, you know, functioning life, I'm sure. But yeah, it was just hard and reading that she needed to write this story because she had just gone through this whole experience with the caregiving and how that was really based on like her experience with it, and she just really wanted to shine a light on the people who every day are, you know, caregiving, especially for a family member or something. And yeah, just ugh. And really kind of, and there's also the element to which we also haven't touched on. There's a lot going on in this book, but you know, Anna's not able to kind of find that magic that she had with this viral video, and so she's just kind of
violin playing. She's a violinist.
Yeah, but I said viral video.
I know, but we
Okay.
never explained that she plays the violin.
Well, we did in the back. And anyway, so she's just never able to like kind of find that magic again, and you know, even when I was reading it, because I kind of knew that this is a close one for Helen Huang. And so I kept thinking about like, because Kiss Quotient was a big, you know, deal. It was, and so
a big popular book for a first book.
And so I couldn't help but think and realize that Helen Huang is kind of talking of her own experience and kind of trying to find that
magic again that she had with Kiss Quotient.
Yeah. But that, you know, both Anna and I'm assuming Helen Huang just kind of realize like you just gotta go with you know how it comes to you, and so I thought that element was also interesting. And
reading the author's note was very emotional for me because I just read this book and not realizing that what a personal story it was for her, and then reading the author's note I was like, oh gosh, that would be
well. And then in the author's note too, she even says like, I know that this is not going to be a like crowd pleaser
like everybody loved the other ones.
But it was just what she had to, it was the pen that she had to put to the paper, you know, at that time in her life. And so I really liked that and kind of gaining the insight into what was going on. It feels cheap to say this now, but let's talk about sex.
Oh, ouch. Bad timing.
Yeah. But it's like we said, I do think that, you know, we talk about sex scenes that are super relevant to the plot, and I do think that this is definitely a book where it's very in
fact, every sex scene that we read is very relevant to the plot.
Yeah.
And a lot of them are start and stop sex scenes. I mean, we don't actually have like full on sex until pretty well into the book.
Yeah. But I read, because her overall lesson about herself that she's learning in this book about masking and needing to be able to love herself and know herself, like, plays itself out in their sexual physical relationship. And
it's like a gift she gives him to share with him
that's kind of the ultimate sign of her trusting him that she can show to him, is
because she's never shown anyone else.
Yeah. How to please her.
Yeah.
And I really liked how that all played out. And
I agree.
I think it really added to, like, you know, because we talked about how the romance is not super relevant, but I think that those are the scenes where it, like, you really feel the intimacy and the connection between them and things like that. So I was grateful for what it did to the plot and also the romance that we like a lot. What was your swooniest moment? I know we talked about also how this one's kind of a hard one, but
I mean, generally, he's just so kind and so patient.
That's
and
mine too.
So he just generally, because there's no one thing that really stood out. I mean, I guess, you know, him encountering her in the bathroom when she's gone in there to melt down in their first date, which, you know, and then he hadn't even ever met her. But he's just so, you know, are you okay? He's always checking in with her. And he's just so caring with her that it's very sweet.
Yeah, I have just written down his patience and understanding. And also with that, I think I also really liked the scene where they do have sex and just how much, like, it means to both of them, and how he, like, has so much pressure on himself to, like, make it good for her, because, like we were saying, like, he's kind of insecure at this point. And so I just found that, like, really sweet and endearing and swoony, I guess.
Well, we knew Kwan's book was going to be sweet and endearing.
Yeah. Okay. Lots to talk about, obviously, in this book, because we just spent a lot of time talking about a lot of different things. And you all also had a lot to say, so let's dive into that. Cassie says, I really liked this book. I loved Anna and Kwan's chemistry, and I really enjoyed Anna's development throughout the story. Helen Huang is definitely a favorite author for the wonderful autism representation in her stories, but this story was a lot heavier than I wanted or expected, and I ended up feeling like too much time was spent on Anna's family and not enough time was spent on Anna and Kwan's relationship. Overall, the Kiss Quotient and the Bride Test are my favorites in the series, but this one was a solid 4-star read for me. I would, when I think about this series as a whole, I think that, they are all on par with each other for being, like, amazing books. But this one is definitely one of the harder to read. I think Kiss Quotient and Bride Test are more fun.
Yeah.
For lack of a better word.
But it was a worthwhile read, I would say. Mm-hmm. Like I said, I think it was almost life-changing for me that I now...
It's kind of like a long shot, right?
Yeah, long shot where it changed my perspective on people who are in abusive relationships. This one changed my perspective on people who are dealing with issues like this and being on the spectrum.
Yeah. Arthur emailed in, and Arthur, I'm sorry because I missed his email on... Rosalind Palmer. So I'm sorry, Arthur. So here's his thoughts on The Heart Principle. The Heart Principle was a love for me. That applies to this series in general. Helen Huang continues to be a master of portraying her MCs through a deeply empathetic lens. That is well said and definitely true. This works especially well for The Heart Principle, which is significantly darker and more self-reflective than her previous novels. I got so wrapped up in Anna's story as she grappled with her new autism diagnosis and her caregiver burnout, and underwent a long but necessary journey of self-acceptance, something Kwan, who is as much of a cinnamon roll as Michael, experienced as well. I found Anna to be reminiscent of Stella, seeing as they're both autistic women who seek spicy times, albeit with different motivations in mind. If there's any gripe that I have, I only wish the book could have made it more definitive that ethical non-monogamy is a valid way of pursuing relationships as long as everyone involved has given their consent. Well, I think it's made pretty clear overall that Julian is a terrible partner because he's going into the open relationship without getting the green light from Anna and is being generally negligent towards her. There are moments where it feels like he's supposed to be terrible purely because he wants an open relationship. And yeah, fair point, well made. I mean, there are people that do that and agreed. If it's agreed upon by both parties, but the fact that he's just like, I want to do this, but still keep you on the back burner, and you have to be okay with that.
Well, and then when Anna says that, she met someone and he's like, really? It's like such a put down that it's like,
yeah,
it's okay for me to go have sex with all these women, but really? You
Well,
think you're going to meet someone?
Because, and she says, like, he assumed that I was just going to sit back and do nothing. And,
and wait for him to come around.
Yeah, which is shitty.
Yes.
Kristen says, okay, I actually did not rate this book when I finished it because I felt like I couldn't accurately, fairly rate it. This is hard because I really love Helen's writing, and this book was well written and I believe extremely relatable for anyone who has had to care for someone with any kind of long-term illness, condition, health issues, etc. Caretaker burnout is real, and the stigma and shame for sure needs to be lifted. Helen made me feel what Anna was feeling as I read the story, so I understand and wholeheartedly support why Helen wrote this book the way she did. Her author's note in the book, and I believe even an Instagram post she made many months ago about the book being essentially rehauled, clearly explain her perspective and reasoning. That being said, it should not have been marketed as a romance, in my opinion. Had it been marketed as literary fiction with romantic elements or women's fiction, even though I don't love that phrase, same, I think that would have been a better fit and calibrated some expectations. I also think because of how much many of Helen's readers have been dying for Kwan's story, that perhaps this book should have been a standalone outside of the Kiss Quotient universe with a different hero, since we spent so much time in Anna's POV. Again, I understand why, but I feel like Kwan was more of a supportive role than a main character. I would have gladly waited for his story to be in her next book, and I think this story would have been just as powerful with a different hero, since this truly was more Anna's journey. So still an important read overall, but not one I am likely to revisit the way I have the Kiss Quotient and the Bride Test. Yeah, what do you think about that?
Well, I think that's a good point, because the same thing I pointed out about we didn't get to see any of his family that we've seen in the other books. Mm-hmm. I think it definitely could have been.
I think Kwan is a good candidate because so his,
we already know though his background where he's got a brother that has autism.
Yeah, well, and I think his experience kind of being, understanding, like being more sympathetic to people who are on the autism spectrum, people who have Asperger's, things like that. So he's more understanding of that. And also, he is by nature a caretaker. Right. And so so I think he's a good candidate for Anna, but I don't disagree that this hero could have been somebody else. Could have been anybody. Maybe we could have had a book for Kwan that was more tonally in keeping with the rest of the series. But to a certain degree, I also don't fault Helen Huang for just for
wanting to wrap things up.
Yeah. Yes. And, I also think that there might be certain behind the scenes legal, or whatever. I don't know.
Well, our publishers might be pushing for things and stuff.
Yeah. But it's like I said, I think this book could definitely benefit from different book covers and things like that would make the tone much more apparent.
In keeping with the...
Yes. So...
Yes.
I don't disagree with any of that. Catherine says, Kwan is so great, love him, but my swooniest moment actually comes from Anna when she plays the violin for him for his birthday.
That was cute.
That was sweet. And it's also just, such a relief to know that she's kind of getting there.
Yes, moving forward.
Yeah. Georgina says, I don't know how I feel about this book. I have so many thoughts, but I'll try to get my feelings in some sort of order. Feel free to shorten this rant for the podcast. Nope, reading the whole thing.
The whole thing.
1, story. This was my most anticipated release for 2021. I loved the first 2 books in the series. Initially, it was supposed to be a Sabrina retelling, which I was super excited for, but the author ended up changing the story due to her personal burnout episode. It would have been fine, but I felt like the book ended up reading as different stories merged together in one, like some parts of the story still belonged in the first version, like all the sweet and loving first part, and then came the heavy-hitting second part. I'm trying to think if...
Like Sabrina the Teenage Witch?
No, like Sabrina, Audrey Hepburn.
Okay, I got it.
Jeez, Mom. I'm the millennial. I'm supposed to go with the
Are
Sabrina.
we going to go with Audrey Hepburn or Julia Ormond?
Audrey Hepburn.
Okay. All the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think if I see any Sabrina, like, left over in this book, but...
I don't see it at all.
No. But I do see where she's coming from with, it's slightly disjointed in elements. I will concede
but
that.
I do think that she tries to, like, break it up by the before, during, and after.
Yeah. Georgina continues. The characters. This book is basically Anna's story. I liked her and sympathized with her from the first chapter. As the story moves along and her journey gets tougher, I wanted her suffering to end. It all felt too real. Credits to the author. Maybe this is the only reason I was willing to give her a chance after the unforgivable thing she did to Quan. Heartbreak emoji. Now onto my Cinnamon hero Quan, who has been the hero for everyone since book 1 and deserved so much better. And I am not talking about Anna, but a better story. His story felt like a complete sidebar and the most Frankenstein part of the book. We didn't get enough chapters, and the ones we got felt very disconnected to the main story, especially after the hospital episode. The running on a mountain as the final act of personal self-acceptance felt like it came out of nowhere. And at the end, while we read Anna's final chapters where she suffers from suicidal thoughts and depression, we just hear from her account that he is there. But on his final chapter, he's just worried about the business merger. I'm telling you, this must have been part of the first version of the story. He was such a great and important character in the first books that it feels like a disservice that he reads as a secondary character in his own story. I don't disagree with that, Georgina.
Yeah.
She continues. The author. I admire Helen Huang so much, and I think her writing is great. In this book, she gives an excellent portrayal of the struggles of managing everyone's expectations, autism, masking, the unspoken burden of caregivers, Asian culture, how tough love hurts, and grief. The way it is written, you can feel the autobiographical nature of the story, and I think it's so brave to put your raw emotions in your work like that. However, I can't deny that I'm a bit disappointed she completely changed the tone from the previous books. This one felt more like a standalone than part of the series. We didn't get that many interactions with the characters from the previous books, and I'm sad that something I enjoyed so much ended on a bittersweet note. I was left wondering if this is even a romance. I've seen some debate on whether it be better classified as women's romantic fiction. I'm still on the fence about it. I know we do get some sort of happy ending, but it feels sad as well as incredibly rushed. Yet the argument can be made that this HEA from a heroine dealing with depression and grief with her partner by her side is just as valid as any other. I don't know. I look forward to read/hear what everyone else thinks. Yes.
Next one.
Well, yeah. I don't know where, and I agree. It is an odd note to end the series on. Not odd, but yeah. I mean, it is totally different from the rest of the series. And
I have a hard time though with us sitting back and saying, I think this is a book that she really felt she needed to write. I think she really felt she needed to share this with the world and her readers.
But anybody who's saying, I don't think anybody's saying she shouldn't have written it.
I understand that. I get that. But I don't know. I feel bad sitting back and saying it shouldn't have been part of her. I don't know.
She wrote it the way she wrote it, and that is her prerogative because it's her books.
And like I said, I mean, I think publishers were pushing her to finish the series, and so she felt...
Well, and to a certain degree, I'm sure she was also pushing herself to finish the series.
Yeah.
Because I know how that works. And... yeah. So it's like, you do you.
Yeah.
Because I know nobody is saying that she shouldn't have written the book because the way she did. And it's like I said, I'm very happy I've read this book and I loved the book.
Well, even like I said at the beginning, it's like I loved that I read this book. As a romance, I don't know that it's much of a romance, but
yeah.
I mean, it's a good book and it's got good romance in it, but I don't know that I would consider it a straight up romance novel.
Yeah. We need to come up with like a subgenre that's just like as soon as romance read.
And not women's fiction. Let's call it, well, fiction is a thing.
For all genders.
Yes. Anybody who wants to can read it. It's not just for women.
Yeah.
Including romance novels.
Yeah.
But,
yeah, but like there needs to be some sort of subgenre within romance that like when people hear it, they understand like, okay, this is
borderline not romance.
Yeah. Because we read I mean, I feel like that's the thing that we say all the time now is that this reads more like women's fiction. And it's all books that are being marketed as romance. So it's like we need to figure out something that's not women's fiction because I don't like that term. And then also is not quite romance but has things that romance readers are going to still enjoy. I.e. romance.
So we'll call them gromances. Because people grow. It's about the growth of people.
I like it.
It's about someone's journey.
It's more about the journey.
To grow and learn.
I don't hate that, Mom. You heard it here first.
Go out there and sell that word. Gromance. It doesn't sound very nice.
Well, it sounds, like, especially when people think about romance, it's, like my mind immediately goes to erections when you say grow.
Well, your mind does anyway.
Which was more about me than anything. Okay, Kayla says, I had been waiting so patiently for this one, both the book and this pod episode. LOL. Thanks, Kayla. I love Helen Huang, and I genuinely enjoyed this book. In my opinion, it was better than The Bride Test, but it did not compare to The Kiss Quotient. I really, really loved Quan, though, and also loved the contrast between him as the tough, tattooed motorcyclist and Anna as the awkward, mousy violinist. I do think this book had heavier themes than the last two. It wasn't something I was fully prepared for, but when reading it shortly after a family member passed away from cancer, it really comforted me. That's good to hear. Because I feel like for some people that would be a hard journey.
I couldn't get through it because...
Yeah. I don't think that was probably the case for other readers who weren't expecting it, though. Overall, I enjoyed and will continue to buy her future books. Yeah, for sure. She's such an amazing writer. And like I said, I was so moved by the book. Literally. Ashley says, this pains me to say, but I did not like this book. While I absolutely loved the first two books, this was difficult to read. It felt like there was Anna's story and Quan's story, but not Anna and Quan's story. Outside of the first part, there weren't that many interactions between them, so it was hard to connect with their relationship. I always appreciate Helen bringing autism rep in her books and certainly understand that the difficulties don't automatically get better because of a relationship, but I wish we would have been able to see more moments of them being happy. I like to feel light and hopeful when I finish a romance book, and this left me feeling pretty weighed down. I was also missing interactions with Quan's family, like Mom said. I would have loved to see more of Kai and Esme, and where the hell was his mom? You can't tell me that the same woman who goes to Vietnam to bring back a bride for Kai is not popping in to check on Quan. We heard about Mom on the periphery, like sending food and stuff like that, but yeah, I mean, we already mentioned.
Especially since he was struggling, it seems like his mom would have been up in that business.
Yeah, for sure. Yes. I can totally see where you're coming from, Ashley.
Yes.
I could not say that I did not like this book, but I understand all of those sentiments that you expressed.
Well, and most of them are things that we've already touched on.
Yeah. Maida says, I liked this book and the author's note provided a lot of context, but I did not feel like I connected with the characters as much as the first two books. I wanted to hear more from Quan's side of how it was for him to stand by as her months went by. I'm not sure she treated him all that well in the end. Yeah. This book, the book also doesn't acknowledge her extreme privilege in being able to afford an apartment, etc. that whole time. Others with
Especially in San Francisco.
Yeah. I honestly kept thinking that, like...
She must have made a butt ton of money off that YouTube video.
Viral video must have really... Maida finishes, others with such severe mental illness would be homeless. Yeah, especially, like we said, especially in San Francisco.
Yeah, seriously.
Yes. And I also, yeah, in a certain respect, I wish that there had been more build up in their relationship, just because, kind of like Mom insinuated earlier, he's really put through the ringer. And so well, and even after, because, after her dad died and they went through all that, and I thought, oh, good, she's going to start. No, she gets worse after that. And, the brink of suicide and all of that. And he's just so sweet with her and caring. And I just wanted to see more of what he was thinking going through all of this. Well, and
because it couldn't have been easy for him. And so it would have been nice to have, I feel this way, but I'm going to help her because I love her. And,
Well, and if we had more context for really why he needed to stay with her.
Yeah.
Because, she really puts him through the ringer, especially there in that last part. So,
well, and that's like I was saying, I wish they had built up the relationship more before her dad got sick.
And I don't want that to come off as sounding insensitive, but, that's a tough thing to be, especially in they are in a committed relationship, but in a relationship that is not bound by legality of marriage and things like that.
Yeah.
That's
well, and he even says, my girlfriend has 2 boyfriends. And just that whole situation seems awkward and hard to stick it out through.
Yeah.
But anyway, I think that I could have used a little more buildup of the relationship before all of this went down. Yeah. To be on board with why he's sticking to it.
Yeah. Raquel says, this is going to be long, so please take a deep breath, Ellen. Thanks for looking out, Raquel. Based on this discussion, it seems to me like the heart principle is to Helen Hoang's work what 99% mine is to Sally Thorne's post the hating game work. Good comparison. I personally really like this book and admire Helen Hoang so much for taking the risk to write this story. While it was difficult to understand all her actions or inactions, I felt so much empathy towards Anna and learned a lot from her journey. I think in the end, to me, it was comforting to read a love story in which someone loves you for who you are and cares about you regardless of all your problems and things going on in your life. As for others who suggest the hero could have been anyone else and save Kwan for another story, I respectfully disagree. I read The Bride Test for the first time a week before, so of course I had high expectations about Kwan. This is not exactly the same Kwan though, and that's understandable, and I kind of liked it. It's been 2 years since we last saw him, and he has gone through tough shit. I appreciated Kwan's testicular cancer backstory. We don't read that in romance, and I, for one, am on board with having more heroes going through the struggles that many men face in real life. I guess what I'm trying to say is that I'm okay with my heroes being quote-unquote broken, especially this guy who was used to taking care of others and had to go through the experience of being the one who's cared after. My one quibble is that even though Kwan's insecurities are alluded to several times in the book, we don't really get more context aside from his body insecurities post-surgery, which we could have also delved deeper into alongside his emotional insecurities towards intimacy, changed perspectives on life, his relationship with his family and his career. This could have balanced the book. So yeah, a bit more Kwan and his family would have been nice, but that would have been a way too long book and probably a big challenge for the editor. And maybe in the end, this book needed to be about Anna and her family. This was a very realistic story, and I know many of us read romance to actually escape from reality, so I understand those who didn't like the book. Even if it's hard to categorize the book, the first part is a romance novel, the second is women's fiction, and the third something in between. I think it's important to admire the overall beauty of the story, the characters, and the writing. I'll definitely read anything Helen Hoang writes.
I think the word she's looking for is bromance.
That's the something in between.
She just hadn't heard it yet.
So there you go, Raquel. We're always looking out. Yeah, so I think I appreciate that kind of differing opinion on the I don't know where I land on where I don't know. It's her book. She can do whatever she wants. So, what say do I have? But, so I see both sides.
And there's a different flavor in each one of these books. And I like that she points that out. And I don't know that there's anything wrong with that. I think that's okay.
Yeah. Okay. Victoria says, I don't think I can add much more than what's already been said in the other comments, but I'll give my thoughts. Let's start by saying that I will read anything Helen Huang writes. Her writing style is so direct and refreshing, simple and yet not shallow, that I can't really fault her in any way. I also appreciate that despite the change of direction from what this book was originally going to be about, she has managed to publish 3 very different books that are connected by the overarching theme of autism without being a carbon copy of each other. Did I expect this book to be different? I did. The original blurb described a quite different story, and I agree with others who have said that this should not be considered a romance novel. I find that often the marketing of some books is quite misleading from the cover to the summary. I'm looking at you, meet cute. Yeah, that was one I remember being very different than.
Yeah.
But this said, the author took quite a risk in telling a story that is not often told. One that many people can relate to down to the heartbreaking acts of the everyday, ordinary caring for someone. While I was reading it, I did feel that Anna's story was taking over much of the book and Quan was left out of the page more than I would have envisioned. But somehow Helen Huang has a way of making you feel even more with her author's notes, and suddenly everything made more sense. Will I remember this book for the romance? No. But I think I will remember it for the way it depicts the very essence of a human experience that many of us hope to not have to go through.
Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. And I think that's a good way of saying it. Will I remember it for the romance? Probably not. But it
will be remembered.
Yeah, and it's still, a very, if not more, valuable book than some of them that we've read. Lori, like-minded Lori, says, as a standalone, I probably could have said I loved this book, but as an installment in the Kiss Quotient universe, it fell a little short of a love for me. Like others have said, it felt so much weightier than the other books in the series, and I had hoped to get a more Quan-centric story. But putting my expectations aside, I can appreciate that this was an exceptional book. Huang's writing pulled me in right away. Anna's discovery of her autism is so nuanced and real. Her struggle with the violin piece that was written for her was so specific and painful, and her attempts to break out from behind her mask and be herself with her family was so heartbreaking. I think I physically cringed during every conversation Anna had with her sister. I really, really couldn't stand Priscilla. She was just so toxic. And Julian, big dumb jerk Julian. Yeah. He was horrible in a whole other way. His reasons for wanting Anna back were just so icky and gross. I was so sad for Anna for so much of this book, and was incredibly relieved that her mom came around in the end, yeah. But even that felt bittersweet. As for Quan, he turned out to be the exact awesome guy we'd met in the earlier books, just with more depth. His cancer journey gave him a reason for the softening around the edges that seems to have happened. I just wish we had gotten more of him and his journey. Ultimately, this book was painful and hard, not for the faint of heart. I don't think I'm overstating it to say it was downright brutal at times. The therapist named Jennifer Aniston was probably
funny.
The only lighthearted aspect of the whole story. The book needs to come with loads of content warnings, but ultimately I am glad I read it. Yeah, agreed. Across the board, like-minded Lori. That's why.
Yeah, we didn't even mention Jennifer Aniston. That was funny.
That was funny. Fernanda says, I had such high expectations for this book. I fell in love with Quan in his first appearance in the Kiss Quotient, and since then have been looking forward to his book. I couldn't help but feel slightly disappointed. This book ended up not being about Quan, but mostly about Anna, and she was really annoying. Yeah. My main issue with this book was that, although it's well written and emotionally, it was not as romance focused as the first 2 books of the series, and as a romance novel should be, in my opinion. Quan's character and his storyline could have been so much better explored. He has gone through a lot, but it felt like his journey was overlooked when he was forced to become a support to Anna. I was also hoping to see more interactions with his adorable family, his mother, brother, sister, and female cousins, but we got to read about Anna's narcissistic ex-boyfriend and her mean sister instead.
Yeah.
Fair.
I like narcissistic for Julian.
Yeah. Yeah, I think if I was missing anything in having a Quan book, it would be his family for sure. Madison says, I personally love this book. As someone who had gone through burnout, it was really beautiful to see that portrayed. I know a lot of people mentioned they didn't see much of a love story between Quan and Anna. I felt so connected to it. It felt so much like when my husband had taken care of me during those times. It may have not been the same steamy type scenes we're used to seeing from Helen, but to me, it felt much deeper and more real. This was one of my favorites all year. All year. Yeah, because talking about it not being a romance, which I'm still, like, not sure I would call it a straight-up romance, but there is something very romantic and real-life romantic about how he is with her during all of that
and
stuff.
just having, being in love with someone that needs extra care.
Yeah. And, those people deserve love, too, for sure, which I know that nobody's disagreeing with me on, but... Okay, and finally, this one's also long, so buckle up. Teresa emailed in her thoughts. She says, I honestly don't even know where to begin with this one. I have loved Helen Hoang since the debut of The Kiss Quotient. In fact, it was the book that brought me to the romance genre and to this podcast. Giving me a book hangover that lasted for weeks. I, of course, followed that up with The Bride Test immediately and adored it as well. However, her 2 previous books didn't reach into my psyche and affect me as emotionally as The Heart Principle. This book truly acted as bibliotherapy for me and helped me unpack a lot of emotional baggage that I hadn't even realized I had carried around for so long. Hoang always infuses her writing and characters with unparalleled empathy. In this book, she was able to bring about themes and issues in an entertaining way, culture, ideas and of success and perfection, challenges of caregiving, emotional abuse, emotional immaturity, love, and acceptance. How was she able to pack so much in a book less than 400 pages? Yeah. My favorite part of Hoang's books are her author's notes. I believe that The Kiss Quotient is Hoang's light and bright and sparkling baby, nod to J.A. The Bride Test was a love letter to her mother, and The Heart Principle is her personal journal, documenting a very difficult period in her life and learning to love herself better, or at least learning to give herself a break sometimes. It is evident without even reading her notes that much of Anna's experiences were her own. It feels too real to not be real. Yeah. To be able to articulate that in her art and get readers to understand is an amazing talent. Hoang turned a rather dark topic and gave it a romantic spin. In reading some readers' reviews on Amazon and Goodreads, I know some don't consider this a romance or find the themes covered by the book rather triggering. I understand where they are coming from, but respectfully disagree. The romance genre has always served to empower women and set good examples for healthy relationships. These heroines grow and evolve from their life experiences, romantic or otherwise. Quan played a significant role in Anna coming into her authentic self, and what is more romantic than that? And I thought that was a good one to end on.
That is good.
Because, yeah, I mean, as the romance genre grows, we have to kind of make allowances for different types of stories to be told. And some of them might be less romantic than we're used to, and maybe less romantic than some romance readers want to read, and that's fair enough, but I definitely think that this is a valuable story to be told, and one that we as a romance podcast wouldn't have gotten to read if it wasn't marketed as a romance. So I think that that's, important in and of itself. So
yeah,
there you go. Any final thoughts?
No, I'm glad I read it. I think it was, like I said, life-altering for me. I think it's opened my eyes.
Yeah, likewise. And yeah, especially in sitting down to write all of the questions and notes for this book, I was just impressed with how much she's able to kind of like unpack and explore in the book and really provide like her own specific brand of insight into. So I just really respect her for that and think she's amazing. And I'm excited to see what she does next, because now we've got, now I'm pretty sure this series might be done. So whatever comes next for her. So keep them coming. Those are our thoughts and some of your thoughts on The Heart Principle by Helen Huang. We would love to hear more from you on our Facebook page, our Facebook group, which is Not Your Mom's Facebook group, our Goodreads group, our Twitter and Instagram, which are both at Not Your Mom's Rom, or you can email us at notyourmomsromancebookclub@gmail.com. So, if you want to read along with us and email us with your thoughts, or if you would like just a book for us to read, we'd love to hear from you. On November 22nd, we will be chatting about Her Naughty Holiday by Tiffany Reese. And the next week after that, we will be having our fall free-for-all, so be thinking about what book you would like to talk about for that episode. Also, there's a poll up on the Facebook group for the next cycle of books. So go let your voice be heard over there as well.
Time just rambles on.
My goodness gracious. Remember, you can subscribe on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify, and wherever your favorite podcasts are sold for free. Don't forget to leave a review because it helps the show, and we just love to read them. All right, thanks, Mom.
You're welcome, Ellen.
Bye.
Bye.
Not Your Mom's Romance Book Club is part of the Frolic Podcast Network. You can find more outstanding podcasts to subscribe to at frolic.media/podcasts.